Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires to talk about Skarbrand and why I think he, like every single other Demons of Chaos faction, be it the Demon Prince with Chaos Undivided or the Monogod factions, the other Monogod factions, Nurgle, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, are in a fairly bad spot on the campaign. And the reason is that all of them rely on one gimmick or another to work. Without that gimmick, they're dead in the water. They don't have the economy, the growth, the structures to maintain themselves. Each of them also struggles to maintain more than one army for very significant portions of the game. For instance, here this is turn 35, and this was something I recorded for my early game guide as Skarbrand. I've taken some territory. It isn't a huge amount of territory, to be fair, but I've taken some territory, and yet I can barely get together a total of 5,000 income. And this ties into one of the biggest issues that Skarbrand does have. His economy is awful, and he's heavily reliant on looting, on post-battle income, on looting, on sacking, on raising settlements to the ground to maintain his economy. He isn't the only faction in the game, but here's the difference between Skarbrand and pretty much anyone else that isn't a demon. Those other factions that rely a lot on sacking, looting, raising settlements to the ground, for instance Beastmen, or the Vampire Coast, or the Greenskins, also have pretty solid economies beyond that. I mean, the Vampire Coast does have a relatively weak economy for their settlements, but they have Pyre Coves, which can generate a good amount of income in their own right. So the Vampire Coast is in a pretty decent state, though not the best state from my perspective. If you're playing a Skarbrand, and as pretty much any of the demonic factions, your economy is going to be significantly weaker than other factions. This is compounded by the fact that your units, even some of your most basic units, if I look over here, like Bloodletters, are extremely expensive. They're expensive in terms of upkeep, they're expensive in terms of recruitment. So even though you're earning quite a bit of money through looting, raising, sacking settlements, you're going to be spending a lot of that money to maintain your armies. And this applies across the board for even weaker units than Bloodletter. Sure, you could recruit Marauder Horsemen or Marauders of Khorne, but even those are still fairly expensive to do so. Now, of course, this is global recruitment, but even they would still be expensive and just wouldn't have the power necessary. So the fundamental problem at Skarbrand is your economy is weak, it's difficult to maintain more than one army, and in Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, doing so, especially on Legendary, can be a problem, because being able to maintain and fight with multiple armies that are proper armies is a critical part of getting your campaign going very fast, very quick. And that is something he just lacks. Now, his gimmicks really, because he has several of them. The first one is that he gains campaign movement range after raising a settlement, but it's not simply just that. It's also campaign movement range after winning a battle. There's also research to improve it. There's things you can get as well. Campaign movement range plus 10% for his skill tree. So you can get a lot of that. But essentially, the way Skarbrand is designed is you're supposed to go from battle to battle to battle without really stopping. But this is something some other legendary lords can do. Valkia is like Skarbrand, but has none of the negatives. She has a strong economy. She has vassals behind that. She has good structures. Her units don't cost a mountain to purchase. Some of them do, sure, but she can support even the more expensive stuff, which is, of course, an issue when you are playing Skarbrand himself. And that's what I mean about gimmick. There's a lot of negatives associated with him, and although he has some positives, they don't necessarily make up for it. Now, can you play a campaign as Skarbrand? Absolutely. You can get very far in it. Because beyond the campaign movement range after winning a battle, he can also summon Blood Hosts. Now, the downside is you have to raise a settlement to summon a Blood Host. Now, Blood Hosts will require upkeep, though it is significantly less than if you recruited the units yourself. Like, for instance, Bloodletters of Khorne here in here in the stack only have 106 upkeep, whereas on Skarbrand they have 186 upkeep. Substantial difference between the two of them. And you can make Blood Hosts really powerful. Here's the issue with Blood Hosts. They still require a significant amount of upkeep. They are the size of a Blood Host is dependent on research and how many units you have in your main army. And on top of that, they will start diminishing very quickly. And finally, they can't replenish. They have no replenishment whatsoever unless you're talking about the post-battle option where you can replenish a certain percentage of them. What this all adds up to, really, is that they're disposable armies. But they do cost a lot to maintain, and although they certainly do have a great deal of combat power, I mean, a Bloodthirster in turn 35 is something significant in its own right, Skull Cannons, Blood Shrines, all that. There's quite a lot in this army to like. However, because they can't replenish, what that really leads to is that if you're playing a campaign as Skarbrand, especially on a hard difficulty, far more so than any other race legendary lord you can think of, you are going to be fighting a lot of battles manually because you want to ensure you take far fewer casualties than you need in order to keep the momentum going. Which, from my perspective, is a problem because a lot of the battles are boring, forgettable, and not all that interesting. Sure, you could fight every single battle manually and get very far, but it wouldn't necessarily be the most enjoyable campaign experience. Would it have power? Sure, it would have power, and as long as you don't lose a battle, Skarbrand, as long as you can keep that momentum going, you're in a good spot. The problem is, the big problem is this with Skarbrand, because he has a weak economy behind that, because he's raising settlements to the ground again and again and again, he doesn't have really anything to fall back onto if he loses. Now, I know a lot of people have gotten used to playing entire Total War campaigns without losing a single battle or losing very few battles, and those mainly inconsequential battles. In fact, I would not expect personally to lose my main stack. I'll lose a secondary stack, something along those lines, some inconsequential sentiments, but a main battle, that can happen rarely if you're a veteran of the series. But it can happen. And unlike many factions of the game, you don't have anything to fall back onto. He's kind of like the reverse of the Tomb Kings. He doesn't really care about settlements too much, because you can get a lot of money for sacking, but if you lose your army, you're not getting back up from that. Whereas the Tomb Kings can lose a lot of armies continuously and not care and still progress their campaign. That's probably the more extreme example of it, but consider a race like the Vampire Counts or the Warriors of Chaos. They can recover from significant army losses, from losing entire armies, from losing your legendary Lord Doomstat. They can recover from that and keep going and still have a fairly successful campaign. With Skarbrand, if you end up in that position, chances are you're gonna lose, and recovering from that, you could, but it would be much slower and more painful than with anyone else. On top of that, there is a problem with the way his settlement system. So Skarbrand wants to take provincial capitals, but he doesn't care about minor settlements. He would like to raise those to the ground to get blood hosts or to get skulls, because you get the option of either getting a blood host or getting skulls when you raise a settlement. Here's the issue with that. When you raise a settlement, the ideal scenario for you, if you're playing Skarbrand, would be that eventually, through a faction mechanic, you would recolonize it automatically after a certain number of turns. There's research for this, and you recolonize territory, raise settlements in a province that you've taken. However, the chances are the AI will do that, or will do that instead, will take those territories instead. For instance, over here in this campaign, I took Carreg Orund, I took out Forik, and quite a bit of his territory has been retaken by the Tomb Kings or the Vampire Counts, with whom I'm at war with. They've retaken this territory, they've colonized it, so it's not useful to me at all. And controlling entire provinces as Skarbrand is actually going to be important if you want to have an economy to fall back onto, especially because of this structure, the trophy hall. It has 3 tiers. Doesn't like the way Skarbrand's economy works is kind of a joke, but you have structures that generate very little income. But the idea is you have these structures, this line in particular, the trophy hall line, that improves the income from all buildings in a local region, right? And you also have like certain structures like this, like the Obsidian Cordium, which improves income from all buildings province-wide. So the idea would be get a lot of structures, add it all together, and you can get a decent economy, especially those that boost your provincial income. That would be great. But if enemies can and will rebuild the lost settlements or the settlements you raise to the ground, then you're not really going to be able to take advantage of that. And that will create problems for you when you are playing as Skarbrand. It will slow down your campaign, it will create nuisances and many problems. He's a one pony trick. That's how I describe him. A one pony trick, like make a powerful army, create blood hosts, go from battle to battle with those blood hosts, fight a lot of battles manually to minimize the casualties, and just keep on going until someone stops you, really. And eventually you might find something that can stop you, either an endgame crisis or a powerful faction on the campaign map. And there lies the issue from my perspective. You can get a lot done with him, but there are significant limiting factors as well. And I don't think that any of the demon factions are very well designed at the moment. You can compare the Warriors of Chaos to any of the demonic factions, and you'll see which is much better, because the steamroller effect, you can get that fairly easily as the Warriors of Chaos, and you can do it with more than just one army. You can get it with multiple armies, multiple proper stacks that don't deteriorate, they can replenish. You can do that far better than what Skarbrand or any of the other demonic factions can do. And that's why I generally hold a very low opinion of him when you consider that. Because you compare Skarbrand to either Warriors Chaos, Vampire Counts, the Greenskins, that have a lot going for them, that do have the ability to raise very large armies very easily, the armies that are very powerful, and raise a lot more of them than you can. That's one of the that's a really big limiting factor when you consider it. Because it's all well and good to have a powerful army. Any faction, any lord can build one powerful army. The best factions, the most powerful ones, are able to lead countless legions into battle. And you don't really have that unless you're counting the blood hosts, which come with all kinds of issues associated with them. And yeah, it's not really a faction or race in general that is in a good spot from my perspective. And that's why I generally rank them so low in my lists. Yeah, sure, it's not the Demon Prince level of bullshit, because the Demon Prince, his gimmick is supposed to be the body parts, and he's the worst of all of them, of the demonic factions, absolutely. But let's not pretend that the other demonic factions are in a much better shape. They are in a better shape, but not much better. They're still all fairly bad, and they all of them have significant limitations in the game because of the way they were designed. And I think that this idea of building factions on a gimmick with like weak economies and building them on a gimmick just doesn't work very well. I mean, you can even contrast Skarbrand to Tarux. Tarux, yeah, he is the kind of guy who needs to go from battle to battle to battle to battle, win a lot of battles to get anything done, or else you'll have a weak campaign. But he has growth, far better growth potential, and he has something to fall back on that's not so easy to take down, because he doesn't pay anything for recruitment. You pay a ridiculous amount for your recruitment. So what would I change? What would make it better? Well, I think having a better economy to fall back on would work better. Having a higher chance to resettle raised regions would work better. Having cheaper units to recruit would work better. If you added all up those together, yeah, it would be a better campaign. Of course, that would make him overpowered, perhaps. But I do think the current state that he's in is a fairly weak state. By the way, and something worth mentioning, though I wouldn't necessarily use it as a metric to judge any campaign on, but I feel you can tell a lot about how a particular lord or faction or race, how strong they are, based on how well their legendary lords do. Do they get wiped out? Do they struggle significantly on expanding on the map? You may find that some of the very best races and legendary lords don't, and some of the weakest do. Skarbrand, even though he has a lot of potential in his early game province, does actually struggle a significant amount to expand. And sure, when you meet his army, it is a scary sight on the campaign map, but it's just one army. The factions and races that I dread when I'm playing a campaign aren't the ones that just have one army. They're the ones that have 4 or 5 armies behind them that stand stack after stack after stack against you. And that therein lies the issue, as I personally said. Feel free to disagree. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you next time.